and they make possible to organize this very important side event. In this moment, the whole world is facing now challenges that bring us in an unexpected and mostly unknown context. The COVID-19 pandemic shows us the challenges to achieving the 17 SDGs and highlights the need for a shared framework for tackling global challenges. No country in the world is on track to meet all the goals by 2030, and collective action is needed to make real progress. Now is the time to demonstrate that we have the capacity to rapidly adapt and overcome this crisis in a sustainable way. All governments and partners have to make multilateralism, inclusion, and equity to the guiding principles of all COVID-19 recovery programs. Also, during COVID recovery, Romania may encounter some challenges in adopting coherent and integrated approaches to the SDGs implementation, filling the gap between planning, implementing, and budgeting the SDGs. The recovery gives priority to address the short-term economic consequences of the pandemic, and sustainable development priorities might get sidetracked. Difficulty in undertaking rapid assessment of the impact of recovery policies on SDGs and their linkages to other policy sectors, interlinkages among policy issues, and all of the government approaches are of extreme importance for an urgent recovery that doesn't undermine the SDGs objectives and the accomplishment made so far in Romania. To achieve our long-term vision and better align policies across sectors with sustainable development goals, Romania is committed to adopt the OECD's recommendations on policy coherence for sustainable development as a structuring principle for policy making. Building a strong, inclusive political commitment and leadership is crucial for policy coherence approach. A crisis always changes priorities of the political leaders, and this can be a major challenge for the implementation of the SDGs. Fortunately, sustainable development has the necessary features to be seen more like a solution to the crisis. Difficult times bring the need for strong leadership with a strategic, holistic view. Romania, as an EU member state, strongly supports a socio-economic reconstruction with the EU Green Deal at its core. What we really need is a paradigm shift towards a more sustainable economy. It is very important that EU institutions are developing new instruments that will bring more green investments. We have this Just Transition Fund mechanism. We have the Action for Circular Economy, the strategy for biodiversity, the taxonomy regulation, European Investment Bank, which will become a green bank. So the policy coherence must serve the Union's ambitions of clean growth in the direction of sustainable society, more greener, more digital, equitable, and inclusive. So in conclusion, in these very difficult moments, it's very important to strengthen our collaboration. Romania is determined as a regional hub to continue promoting the 2030 Agenda principles now, when they are more relevant than ever. I would like to thank OECD for being a great partner. I think together we managed to accomplish some important tasks regarding policy coherence for sustainable development and budgeting. We are on the right path when it comes to support international cooperation and sharing good practices. One example is Global Hub on the governance for SDGs, which has been launched 1 year ago. I must say it means a lot that Romania will be a pilot country in the joint UNDP-OECD initiative and the catalyst for the hub in the larger Southeast Europe region. So we have to take a chance We have to make a change. Let's do it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Borberly. So let's turn it over now to our president of IGES, Kazuhiko Takeuchi. Takeuchi-sensei, could you please pose question to Mongolia?
Yes, I would like to ask, can you discuss the opportunities and the challenges to making related policies areas such as air pollution, climate change, and mining coherent in Mongolia? Can you also discuss tools that NDA uses to overcome challenges to coherence in these related policy areas?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Takeuchi-sensei. And distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as the world continues to grapple with the effects of the COVID pandemic, now more than ever, countries acknowledge the urgency for coordinated goals and actions from all stakeholders across economic, social, and environmental sectors. So, to get practical, how do we ensure coherence? Well, here at the National Development Agency, we have been paying particular attention to ways in ensuring policy coherence and the integration of the SDGs into national policy frameworks. Despite Mongolia's significant potential for sustainable development, policymakers are under pressure to deliver on important global goals, such as the SDGs, Paris Agreement, Sendai Agreement, recover from the pandemic transition towards sustainable economies, whilst ensuring the whole of government plus a whole of society approach. Our research on the coherence of our current policies and institutional mechanisms reveals that lack of suitable tools, approaches, guidelines for integrated policy making, lack of capacity of policy planners, lack of resources, for example, financial resources, and lack of legislation around it are pressing challenges aggravating silos across economic, social, and environmental sectors, and ultimately could prevent from or even reverse development gains. So how do we unlock these bottlenecks? Well, immediate strategic awareness raising at the high level. Technical and financial support is needed to ensure the use of an integrated approach in development policy planning process, which involves identifying possible synergies and trade-offs between SDGs and their associated targets. One of the practical ways we have been overcoming these challenges through the use of tools. For the past 3 years, we have been working to develop systems thinking tools and approaches in cooperation with Stockholm Environment Institute, Asian Development Bank, UN DESA, and UN SCAP. For example, in 2018, we have been developed a policy coherence assessment tool based on the CEI's SDG interlinkage tool, which was legislated into our development policy planning. In our first voluntary national review presented in 2019, we featured the issue of air pollution as an example of a complex, multi-sectoral development challenge that would benefit from a comprehensive analysis using a systems approach to develop effective solutions. And most recently, with support of ADB, we developed an easy-to-use tool for mainstreaming consideration of national level environment SDGs and socio and economic interlinkage is into the national development policy making process. During all of these efforts, we facilitated extensive stakeholder engagement and capacity building activities. So, ladies and gentlemen, the 2019 SDG Summit called on countries to mainstream the 2030 agenda into our national planning instruments, policies, strategies, and financial frameworks. If we are to build back better from the crisis and accelerate the implementation of the Agenda 2030, policy planning methods will need to go beyond standard modeling and forecasting tools into dynamic and holistic approaches to assure social embeddedness of coherence policies. Mobilization of international and domestic resources, increased investment in policy coherence and development policy planning systems will be imperative. New partnerships will need to be forged across private sector, civil society organizations, international organizations, volunteers, academia, and other part of the society. The time is now to accelerate the efforts to mobilize funding sources and technical support to move towards policies that better incorporate social and environmental dimensions while leaving no one behind. Now, I know that IGES has done work on developing tools on SDGs. I would like to ask you to please describe your ongoing work on decision-making tools and how they can lead to stronger and more coherent development strategies and plans in the COVID era.
This is Takeuchi. Thank you very much for your very important question. At IGES, we believe that decision-making tools can strengthen governance for the SDGs, especially in the COVID-19 era. IGES work on co-benefit reflected belief. Co-benefits are the multiple benefits of policies that mitigate climate change while achieving other development priorities. Last year, we contributed to a high-profile UNEP report that identified 25 measures that could deliver co-benefits for air quality, public health, climate change, and other issues covered by the SDGs in the Asia and Pacific. The report drew upon integrated assessment models to identify these measures. Yet, identifying those measures was only part of the report's main narrative. The other half involved recommending governance arrangements supporting the widespread implementation of these measures. Often widespread implementation will require the multi-level nested governance structures. These structures can help align the interests of government agencies, businesses, community groups, and other civil society stakeholders at the different levels. Aligning these interests can then help enable local innovations while allocating finance needed for their spread. For example, a solution to air pollution and climate change in Mongolia that we are researching at IGES are efficient boilers and district heating. Transitioning to new boilers and heating system will require working with local government and businesses to identify appropriate technologies while accessing funds and adhering to standards from the national government. A step Japan is taking to align interest in the circulating and ecological sphere, or CES, CES is a concept that calls for managing resources at appropriate scales. It further supports integrating three visions: decarbonized society, resource circulating society, and the society in harmony with nature. CES is now helping local governments in Japan and other parts of the world to localize the SDGs and develop voluntary local reviews, or VLRs. It is also supporting the sustainable management and governance of intermediary ecosystem between urban and rural areas. Another way we have sought to strengthen governance is through the IGES interlinkage tools, as you mentioned. The tool employs network analysis to identify synergies and trade-offs between development objectives in many contexts. I would like to close by underlining two related points. First, developing science-based models to enhance SDGs governance is quite essential. Tools that can strengthen the evidence base for the government decisions have gained added importance in the COVID era. At the same time, bringing governance considerations into science-based modeling is also crucial. Models that can demonstrate the co-benefits of nested multi-level structure can lead to better research and more sustainable governance. Thank you very much.
ESDN and Malta. So Annika, could you please raise a question for our colleague from Malta?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and many greetings from Helsinki, the capital of Finland. So happy to ask colleague George from Malta, could you kindly describe what lessons can be learned from your recent experiences in aligning budget measures with SDGs? And this is very pertinent question also in Finland, as we have taken some steps into that. So do you think that this approach to policy coherence can be useful for your country's recovery from COVID-19 as well?
Thank you, Annika, and good morning or good afternoon to you all. Yes, aligning budget measures with the SDGs was one of the first tasks which Malta undertook to mainstream sustainable development principles across government, and also starts a building block towards more policy coherence in the government structures, particularly within the budget process. Rather, apart from the aligning of the budget measure per se, we wanted to strengthen the budget process. We sort of to give a better overview for future planning requires not only to the for government structure, but also the projections to project the government as a leader also for the business sectors. So last year it was the first time which we did the exercise, and this is a process not based on 1 year, but is a goal based on a number of years to see the real effects of it. So far from the initial experience which we have from the alignment of the budget process, with the alignment with the SDG, we have saw that we can improve the overall policy coherence, which reinforces the very nature of the SDGs as being overarching and intertwined. As you all know, SDGs have a cross-cutting element, and so it gives us the opportunity not to think just on a one or single or dual ministerial level, but to try and link also other ministries together so that we can achieve coherence and also achieve better planning for the budget process. It means that a project, when we think of a project, it has to be not just done by one ministry, but it has to be done jointly by 3 or for ministries because it affects their daily workings. So moving towards coherence, another lesson was that the coherent budget avoids conflicts between different resource allocations. So basically, when you're bringing the ministries more together, you are just planning more coherently, more concisely, to the extent that you start putting on mainstreaming the finances where they should be in a more strategic position, I must say. And this also helps to go to the third step, which sees the budgets that will be in line with other international commitments as well, such as in this case the Paris Agreement or the European Green Deal, and whether they are legally binding or not. So that the type of approach also aligns itself with other international commitments which the country has across the time. We also saw that linking with the budget pressures with the SDGs per se, there was also an increase in accountability. It means that it gives more people, senior management, particularly within the ministries, to think further how to better allocate spending across projects, across the development of plans, strategies, etc. So there is a sense of degree of accountability and also transparency in the process, which when you do such alignment, you start closing some of the gaps which you might have not seen before when you did the normal budget process. So then you develop the matrix basically, and this matrix can also reveal the real progress which the country is making towards achieving the sustainable development principles across its workings. So even by aligning the SDGs and to give it what we call SD proofing of the budget, the tool itself can also access government performance year on year. So in reality, to see the real effect of the performance, the progress, we have to really see it on the third year, fourth year onwards, because you have to have a trend to really see the real progress achieved with regards to sustainable development. Another issue which we saw is that SDGs can also help to make the budgets more comparable. So if you use the tool, we can compare the budget to other countries. If you use this more or less the same methodology and which you try to achieve the same goals and indicators, that makes your country comparable to other international to other countries on an international level, and obviously then you can start ranking not only yourself but comparing also yourself to other countries and which progress you have achieved across the time. So basically these were the most lessons learned. Yes, so these lessons can be also very vital experience for not only the COVID-19 crisis, because we see that such an alignment with the SDGs or sustainable development in general, we can portray it as a risk management and foresight planning. So it gives you the alignment itself, it gives you more food for thought and how to plan further in the future, not only in the nearby future, but also in the distant future, which means that we have to go beyond the normal electoral cycles, which are normally a 5-year period. So planning for particular projects, which have to be allocated in the budget year on year, might have a longer foresight, which gives us the real platform from where we can depart, I must say. And also it gives us a platform being the more resilient.
Okay, thank you so much. That's greatly appreciated. So now I'd like to ask for.
We are not hearing you. Sorry.
Eric, your voice is not coming through.
Sorry, we are not hearing you.
Eric, we do not hear you.
Perhaps switch to Eric's.
Thank you very much. And so let's turn it now over to our colleague from ESDN. So Annika, could you explain how do you think the COVID-19 pandemic is influencing or encouraging EU states and other European countries towards further applying PCSD while developing strategies and planning for a and sustainable recovery?
Thank you, Eric. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. Because my picture is freezed somehow, but it's the most important thing that you can hear me. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this very pertinent question. And so the linkage between the COVID-19 pandemic measures and policy coherence for sustainable development has been one of the key topics in the discussions of the European Sustainable Development Network during the
we
recent
seem to be having
week.
technical difficulties with from ESDN. So if that's the case, then I'd like to move the dialogue over to our partners from Egypt and APRM. So first, I'd like to ask Eddie Maloka from APRM to ask a question to our colleagues from Egypt.
Thank you very much, Eric, and good afternoon, dear colleagues, distinguished speakers. Greetings from South Africa. It is indeed a great honor to connect with.
Okay, please, Annika, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Who has the floor? Is it me, Eric, or somebody else?
I'm still here, so if you can hear me, I could continue, but
yes, I'm sorry, there was a technical difficulty in the room. So please, Annika, go ahead and we'll get back to the other speaker in a moment.
Okay, that's fine. So I was just going to explain that for those who don't know the ESDN network, just to inform that it is a network of non-profit. It is a non-profit association that provides a pan-European networking platform for sustainable development authorities, both in national ministries and subnational regions. And we have also engaged many stakeholders in our work, bringing valuable input, also, of course, also from NGOs, academia, and business, for example. And I'm the current president of the ESDN, working together with my vice presidents from Switzerland, Austria, and Finland. And so this is not a EU platform, but a more broader pan-European platform for sustainable development. And why this is very interesting also in the ESDN point of view is that we organize a workshop to our members in June to discover policies and tools with which the European countries are tackling the COVID-19 crisis. And let me here reflect upon some of the findings of the workshop. So first of all, the participants were asked to submit 3 aspects that they thought were necessary to strengthen sustainable development policies during and after the COVID-19 crisis. And in fact, policy coherence was by far the most popular, followed by buzzwords such as trust and societal cohesion. So I think this is very encouraging. And the importance of regional level decision making was also pointed out. When the globalization is suffering some setbacks, concerted regional action could be reinforced as a building block for fruitful multilateral cooperation. That was also one of the takeaways. The countries reporting in the ESDN workshop, they shared many practices and concerns. We heard already the ESDN member country Romania's practices, and like Romania, Italy is also currently working with the OECD on improving the PCSD and integrating it into the revised national strategies for sustainable development. Germany was in the middle of renewing its national sustainable development strategy when the crisis hit, and the reviewed strategy will be presented in 2021 and is likely to be adjusted in the light of the COVID-19. In the Netherlands, the crisis has increased the cooperation between the national and local level, with a feedback loop from the local to the national level, reflecting, for instance, how policies have been implemented and are the policies working or not. And in the case of my own country, Finland, several interministerial working groups have been established in order to ensure sufficient knowledge bases for the decision making. And in addition to the core group on the coronavirus exit and reconstruction strategy, many other thematic working groups were set to support the preparation of the sustainable recovery strategy. And one of the aims was to actually avoid the past mistakes, especially the 2008 financial crisis, but really to leap forward. So I believe that there is a genuine political will in all countries to make the recovery strategies and packages sustainable ones. The challenge is to ensure that all the efforts are coherent in relation to each other, so all the working groups are scoring towards the same goal. Another concern is that it is quite obvious that there will be a strong competition for financial means once the urgent crisis is over. So will the priorities of the public spending still be on sustainability? I believe the key question is how to avoid quick fixes that may potentially turn out to be unsustainable. And as we know, we can use our recovery euro or dollar or whatever only once, and it has to be done in a sustainable way. So to conclude, the 2030 Agenda is definitely the blueprint and the strategy for sustainable recovery, but it is not enough. The policy planners should also be able to provide the decision makers with concrete tools, like the budgeting in the case of Malta, for instance, and also tools for assessing the COVID-19 crisis with the SDG lenses, and also to provide different kinds of models, functional models, for more integrated governance structures. So I will close here. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you so much, Annika, and deeply sorry from this side for cutting you off.
No problem.
Really appreciate it. Okay, so let's turn it over then to colleagues from RM and Egypt. So, Eddie Maloka, could you please raise the question for Egypt?
No, thank you very much, Eric, and good afternoon, colleagues, and greetings from South Africa. It is indeed a great honor to connect with you visually in these critical times of COVID-19. The EPRM is delighted to have this dialogue, particularly with Egypt, since Egypt is one of our active member states. Furthermore, Egypt is currently facing the severe storm of among the countries on the African continent affected by COVID-19, which always, you know, will have negative impact on our countries and the SDGs. We acknowledge that the Egyptian government has embarked on various economic and social reforms in the last few years, and Egypt submitted so far 2 VNRs in 2016 and 2018, respectively. The OECD is also a significant partner to Egypt on aid effectiveness and development cooperation assessment. And my question is that as part of the joint UN OECD MAPS, the mainstreaming, acceleration and policy support, Egypt recently produced a policy paper on integrated governance for coherence implementation of the SDGs in Egypt. And I wanted to ask my colleague, my dear colleague, and brother and Honorable Deputy Minister, Dr. Hameli, how the knowledge gathered through this process helped address the challenges to deliver effectively on the SDGs, in particular with regard to transparency and accountability. I thank you very much.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's an honor to be part of this very important side event. Egypt contributed in the side event of last year, and it is always good to have my dear brother Eddie Maloka with me in this exchange. Let me start by saying that in terms of transparency and accountability, Egypt has presented, as my dear friend Eddie Maloka has said, two VNRs. The last one, the VNR that was presented in 2018, one of the challenges that was cited in this VNR is the challenge of governors. And we recognize that governance is very, very important. And definitely an important part of the governance is accountability and transparency. Let me share with you very quickly 5 initiatives that Egypt is engaged in order to enhance accountability and sustainability. The first one is in terms of, and this is actually, it's not only a governance and data. As we know, in order to know how the country is progressing, we need to look at the indicators of the SDGs. Now, every year we have an extensive report outlining the performance of Egypt in the 17 SDGs with their indicators, and this is shared and coverage and shared in the website of the Central Agency of Planning and Statistics in Egypt. Each year we try as much as possible to try to widen the coverage of these indicators. This is the first issue or first initiative. The second one is associated with, it's very important, it's associated with the move towards the impact-based M&E, monitoring and evaluation. This is, and actually we have a project that is going to be initiated with the OECD soon in order to have or implement such thing. This is very important. It's not only to Egypt, but all our development partners. It is very, very important to focus on how the project, the public projects and the government projects is impacting people and impacting the SDGs. This is, for us, this is very, very important. The third initiative, this is, we have, we know digitization is very, very important, and definitely in the era of COVID-19, digitization is becoming more and more important. Everything is now with the app. So now we have an app, a mobile app, where the users can search by geographic location or by SDG, the public projects and the government projects in the country. This is very, very important. And actually it is interactive as well. So you can send your feedback on the implementation of these projects and the impact of this project, and even suggest maybe new project that the government can initiate. So this is, again, it feeds very much into the transparency and accountability of the government and linking this to the SDGs. And actually, we wouldn't have done this or achieved this and having this app without that. This is something that we did it 2 years ago. We did a mapping now. Every public project in Egypt, government project, a dam, a road, anything. This is linked to the SDG. So it is, we require that each ministry entity, when they ask for public funds, they have to link this with 1 or 2 of the SDGs. So this is something that we are very happy that we did this and we implemented this, and this is across the board in all the government projects. The third or the fourth actually one is the move towards the implementation to program-based budgeting. This is again something that enhances the transparency and accountability of government funds. And not only this, this is something that we also doing this with, and we are moving toward a performance-based budgeting. So again, this is to enhance the transparency of government fund. Maybe the last thing that I want to share with you, and this is very much associated with what we are experiencing right now in terms of the COVID-19 and the crisis and so on. Now we have on our website, on the website of the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, we have a policy tracker that has all the policies that were taken by the government of Egypt in response to the crisis. And this is divided according to the beneficiary. and divided according to the sector. And it is dynamic. So you can search by, as I said, by these parameters. And actually, what we're going to do is that we're going to also map this or link this with the SDGs. So now, not only that we have transparency in terms of what are the actions taken in response to COVID-19 in different sectors and different groups, also we are associating this with the relevant SDGs. I will stop here, and maybe I guess I have to bounce back the question to my dear friend Professor Idi Maruka, and let me ask him for other African countries how transparency and accountability have contributed to achieving important development goals, especially again during this time of recovery and emergency. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Alami. Thank you very much also for the overview of the good work done by Egypt. As the APRM, you know, Your Excellencies, that we think that we believe that accountability and transparency are critical enablers for the effective implementation of Agenda 2030 of the African Union, Agenda 2030, and then the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. They are listed among the SEPA principles endorsed by ECOSOC to support the governance environment of SDGs across the continent at a national level. However, African countries have different experiences in promoting both notions at country level. Here, I would like to focus very, very quickly on four key issues that can enrich this style. The first one is accountability, political accountability. Is that political accountability is crucial for planning and implementing SDGs at the national level. The case of Uganda is it's something that I just want to highlight, not that others are not important. But in Uganda, which is an APRM member country, political accountability is highly recognized to promote Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. The government of Uganda is well positioned to achieve its national 2040 development vision. The government, under the leadership of the Prime Minister, took concrete actions such as establishing a robust national coordination framework to pursue the SDGs in parallel with Agenda 2063 of the African Union. The national coordination framework was set up to enhance the national bureaucracy's engagement with civil society, academia, and even development agencies for proper planning of the domestication of the SDGs, as well as raising awareness and improving the quality of data in this regard. The second area is political accountability is its importance and association with corporate accountability to realize national resilience against external shocks, especially in this case, COVID-19. Accountability is such a broad concept, and we usually focus on political accountability and leadership to get things done. Nevertheless, the business sector and civil society likewise shall preserve a sense of accountability, especially in the COVID-19 times and its unprecedented consequences on African economies and livelihood. One example is the case in Cote d'Ivoire. There, the private sector is actively engaged in funding infrastructure projects in partnership with government. The private-public partnership for SDG articulates a corporate governance responsibility to promote SDGs, including Goal 8, which is on decent work and economic growth, as well as Goal 17 on partnerships for SDGs. In South Africa, where I'm resident, where it has been historically, of course, challenges of social inequality. Here, there is an engagement by the Business Unity Group, which with the government and UN agencies to mitigate the socioeconomic fallout of COVID-19. BUSA, which is this entity, and private sector groups have recently founded a platform to respond adequately to the daunting consequences of COVID-19 in South Africa. Thirdly, Excellencies, is that transparency and the whole of society approach can strengthen the effective management of crises such as COVID-19. Transparency does not, of course, it's against corruption, but it's also about budget transparency for SDGs, enhancing access to information on the country's progress towards the SDGs, and engaging citizens in the public policy processes. Burkina Faso, Benin, Cameroon, and the Democratic Republic of Congo are just examples here. They've already achieved some progress on SDG transparency. The governments there are developing easy tools to enhance public understanding of the budget process. Egypt, we have just heard, as the OECD paper indicated, also working on linking the results-based budgeting process with SDG targets. The whole of society approach is dynamically applied to the case of Senegal and Ghana, for example. In Senegal, there's been developing innovative homegrown ideas to fight COVID-19, such as the local validation trials of the COVID-19 tests and so on. Ghana is also an example and a good example of whole of society approach, as the government developed various platforms to hear from citizens on the assessment of SDGs, particularly SDG 16. There's also an issue of data transparency and collection, which is a real challenge for many African countries. Finally, the fourth issue is really that a quest for institutional resilience at national and regional levels is urgently needed to enhance accountability and countries' recovery from COVID-19 disaster. Within its mandate, and Africa's commitment to African-grown organization for promoting good governance, we at the PRM, we are relooking at our methodologies for peer review, which we do within countries, to now focus more on resilience in the public sector institutions. Therefore, the APRM, in our questionnaire, we have looking at how to upgrade and to improve our questionnaire and our methodology and so on, in order to address it, look at issues of state resilience. We're linking up with other agencies within the African Union and also United Nations to try to bring in questions of state resilience into the core work and the core processes of the African peer review mechanism. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much for that very elucidating answer. It's very useful to understand the situation in Africa. So now we've had some discussion from many different countries that are working on governance and policy for coherence for sustainable development. Now we'd like to turn the discussion over to Italy and Canada to reflect on some of the lessons learned and good practices. So Italy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I would like to pose a question to Minister Hussein from Canada about the fact that governance and policy coherence for sustainable development are crucially and important for advancing the 2030 agenda, is what we are dealing with today. But how does what you heard on these themes today resonate with your experience in Canada? And also, which is I think our contribution in this panel, how can we discuss concrete ways for sharing and applying good practices from partner countries? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the question. Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers of today's event, Romania, Mongolia, and the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development and the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies for this opportunity to share my reflections and learn from the experiences of the speakers and panelists here today. The pandemic has brought to the forefront different challenges and ways of working together that will be leveraged going forward, particularly as we continue to work on recovery measures. We know that we cannot go at it alone in our efforts to confront the multiple dimensions of this COVID-19 crisis. But working with partner countries and with international organizations like the United Nations and the OECD is a key way for us to share lessons learned and stay informed of emerging international best practices. These difficult times we are all facing are offering all of us a new opportunity to continue to work together, to learn from the experiences of other countries, and to adopt our responses accordingly. Our capacity to learn from each other and to do better is strongest when diverse perspectives and voices are shared and heard in settings like this one we are having today. This is not just about sharing our successes. We need to be more open to sharing our challenges and confronting our past mistakes. We're all in this together, and the virus knows no borders. None of us know exactly how the pandemic and its effects will play out. We're still learning its development, but it is clear that this crisis is having disproportionate impacts on the most vulnerable members of our society. Women, youth, indigenous peoples, newcomers, seniors, racialized groups, persons with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ2 community. Prejudice, discrimination, and violence are a lived reality, not only for far too many Canadians, but for far too many peoples around the world. So in building back better, we must take concrete steps to fight racism, build more inclusive institutions and societies, and reaffirm our commitment to the 2030 agenda. So this pandemic is a stark reminder of just how interconnected our world has become. And for the global community to recover and for our domestic economies and societies to bounce back, we need a global coordinated plan. And so we know adhering to international best practices for the implementation of the 2030 agenda and its SDGs means putting the well-being of our citizens as our top priority and protecting our most vulnerable citizens to ensure that they do not fall further behind. So in the face of unprecedented challenges, that means using our response measures to support a strong economic recovery in a positive, active sense, to promote sustainability, reduce inequality and poverty, and build a stronger and more cohesive society. This is not just about getting back to normal. We need to build back better and in a manner that allows us to respond to the kinds of long-term structural shifts that are being accelerated by this pandemic. Multilateralism remains foundational for our collective prosperity and security, and it will be necessary if we are to make progress towards meeting our shared challenges. Continued collaboration will also allow us to learn from each other as we address these novel global challenges. So increased international dialogue at the United Nations, support for peer review mechanisms, such as those within the OECD and others, are essential for governments to learn from each other's challenges and successes. Equally important is for governments to listen to assessments of progress, whether they are from civil society organizations or the international community of national auditors. There is no one answer to enhancing policy coherence, accountability, and transparency. And today's discussion reflects this diversity and the importance of being open to one another. So policy coherence in support of the SDGs is of heightened importance given the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly as we look at ways to protect against the long-term shocks that have impacted our economy, society, and environment, and collectively turn our attention to rebuilding a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable world. Due to the indivisible and interconnected nature of the SDGs, we recognize that effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda requires greater policy coherence in order to promote mutually reinforcing domestic and international policy actions. Taking the time to understand how our policy addressing a specific SDG impact and other SDGs and the potential transboundary impacts of our policies will help strengthen our impact. Action taken on SDGs at the national level must complement and support initiatives taken by other levels of government, as well as international efforts. This is also why we're working with domestic partners at all levels to ensure that every segment of our society is able to contribute to and benefit from the advancement of the SDGs. Canada stands ready to work to advance the SDGs with partner countries, local civil society organizations, the private sector, and stakeholders, and through regional and international institutions. Cooperative multilateralism remains foundational for our collective prosperity and security, and it will be necessary if we are to make progress towards meeting our shared challenges. I look forward to hearing more from the speakers and panelists today. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And Canada, would it be possible to ask a question back to Italy? So for Italy, maybe I'll take over the question. I'm just wondering if you could also let us know how what you've heard today resonates with your own experience and discuss concrete ways for sharing and applying good practices from partners.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Also for the fruitful discussion I heard today. And I personally, and we do agree about the fact that these hard times for the whole world could represent an unprecedented environment to boost PCSD and policy coherence as a mean for bringing renewed energy and credibility to public action, and lengthen, as somebody said before, lengthen the policy and recovery perspective, as already pointed out. Italy is committed to adopt the policy coherence for sustainable development recommendation by the OECD, as somebody already said in the previous panels, and particularly within the implementation and revision process of the National Sustainable Development Strategy, building on intra, inter, and extra-institutional cooperation. So we have a national coordination mechanism based on the presidency of the Council, which established an SDG Commission and a presidency committee for 2030 agenda in the NSDS, providing a national coordination hub and relying on increasing commitment by ministries, statistics system, national statistics system, and territorial entities. Also by 2021, the Interministerial Committee for Economic Programming will turn into the Interministerial Committee on Economic Programming for Sustainable Development, which is not just a formal turning and transformation, but it brings new possibilities for policy coherence exercise. We are also committed in operationalizing most of the issues raised today: accountability, alignment, foresight planning, policy assessment, and coordination, particularly for what deals with our activity at the Ministry of Environment at local level. Also, as Annika said before, the responsibility and the engagement of local and regional levels in these challenging times is quite crucial. So we are promoting the implementation of national strategy for sustainable development at regional and metropolitan level with proper strategies and agendas. We are providing and signing bilateral agreements with all regions and metropolitan cities, concentrating firstly on determining the conditions for creating powerful interdepartmental structures for preventing silos effects and providing a good coordination mechanism also at territorial level. Furthermore, we are stimulating integrated pilot actions, interregional initiatives, and integrated funding in key thematic issues related to sustainability objectives. So we adopted cooperation as a keyword at institutional level, providing common working environments and relying on what we call activators, which are engaged, trained, and motivated people, officers, and experts, building on their experience and networking capacity among institutions and academia, because they play a very relevant role. We are bringing them at the core of the challenge by providing funding for supporting the work we're doing with the institutional mechanisms. With civil society, we are working with the main network organization to design and lead the Forum for Sustainable Development as the main platform for contributing to the Sustainable Development Strategy. So while we made progresses towards policy coherence for sustainable development, we want to do more within the project you already mentioned with the OECD support and the funding from European Commission dealing with the policy coherence for sustainable development, which is intended to produce an action plan for PCSD in Italy, which resonates a lot and shall root sustainable development into policy design, assessment, and revision, as already said. So dialogue, collaboration, and institutional cooperation also, and mostly at EU and international level, is key to us. And also the sharing and exchanging chances just offered, among the others, by the SDN network, which we are a member of, and by the Global Hub on the Governance for the SDG of the OECD, is quite crucial to produce a continuous and productive collaboration environment. I just would like to raise some key principles we just used in the cooperation and exchanging practice mechanism in the domestic dimension with our territorial entities, because we do think that it could be also useful in exchange and peer learning with partner countries. The first one is to be active, to produce opportunities for institutional dialogue and also extra-institutional dialogue, respecting competencies and roles, but also moving deeply into stronger relationship, operationalizing the relationships. The second one is to be creative in finding places for interaction, which are not brand new. We do have to avoid the overlaying and overlapping of platforms and exchange mechanism. We do have to do synergy and to maximize the interaction among the existing ones. That is what we experienced in our country. And we are providing assistance not in a training vision, but in a mutual learning perspective, which is quite crucial in these demanding times of post-COVID perspective. to be in a listening mode, to learn from each other and to hear from right and stakeholders, recognizing the key actors and trying to converge on objectives and methods without avoiding conflicts, but trying to manage the conflict that can raise from the interaction and interlinkages among different SDG implementation. And the last one is to focus on systematizing resources. We do really need to sit around a table and to think about how to deal with the available resources, which has quite a huge amount of resources, at least at the EU level now, available for bringing and boosting the 2030 agenda implementation, how to deal with the coherence of those resources posted to different SDGs, while dealing with the interlinkages and overall impacts, cumulative impacts of all those actions on several SDGs and not only on the one they directly relate to. And also, lastly, I would like to thank you very much for this occasion, and thank you again, and I look forward to hear from the other speakers. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate your inputs, and I think that you offered a lot of insights into lessons that Italy has learned that could apply to other countries, thinking of policy coherence, sustainable development, and governance. So now I turn it over to the last theme for discussion, and that last theme is governance beyond government. So I'd like to open up the question with a question from our colleague representing Arrow, Bindu Bandari. Bindu, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Eric. I'd like to ask my colleague, Filippo, what will be different for businesses in the wake of COVID-19, and how does that difference contribute to a more sustainable society?
Thank you, Bindu. Good day to everybody, and thank you to IGES, OECD, and of course the governments of Romania and Mongolia. Delighted to share very, very few thoughts with you, also knowing that we're short of time. But from our perspective of an association of 200 global companies looking at the linkages between sustainability and business success, we really think the focus needs to lie around 5 particular areas. The first one is really the idea around how do we get away from the dependence on economic activity and growth. I mean, the degree on which social stability and welfare is really dependent on constant economic growth has become a source of vulnerability in the face of this pandemic. And we believe that you need to find forms also from the business sector side to contribute to reimagining the way in which capitalism works, with sort of this key word of reset towards a better form of stakeholder capitalism. So that's the first point. The second point is, of course, I know it has been alluded to, the inequality agenda. So really the high levels of inequality between countries, but also within even rich countries. So really the inequality placed not as a sort of a must do from a moral point of view, but really placed under a business lens as a threat magnifier, really looking at how this increases the vulnerability of society as a whole. And therefore, how do you really rebuild or redesign a social contract that is a little bit better fit to the 21st century and the interdependencies that we have. So really looking at that as a source of vulnerability, the inequality agenda. Thirdly, the weakness of norms and institutions. We have seen there probably a business needing to step up again and really contributing to really finally, if I may say, reforming many of the institutions that govern our world and really building better principles of trust, of the recognition also of interdependence, and adapting really to the cross-border nature of threats such as pandemics. But there are many more threats out there, unknowns that we know are going to be hitting us in one form or another. So really some of these wild cards around the environmental agenda, around cybercrime, around corruption, migration, travel, they're all out there, and business probably needs to do a better job in entering or re-entering dialogue around strengthening these institutions and therefore also strengthening a more sustainable society. Fourthly, the idea of reinvesting and contributing to the investment again in healthcare systems and scientific research. Clearly, the trend lines point to maybe a diminishing diminishing resources in that particular area over the last decade. So how to revitalize global health spending, how to leverage public money, how to find forms of blended finance also for health related solutions, but not only, and how to really give even further credibility to scientific research. I think there's a positive trend there from the business community, but even more needs to be done in the face of the threats. And then lastly, and certainly not least, the focus on efficiency and the creation of short-term value by businesses. I think there's many of them that are rethinking some of these just-in-time approaches, as it's famously called now. So how do you really build in redundancy, slack, and an overall sort of just-in-case approach into your supply chains, into your overall resilience of these supply chains? And certainly a lot of interest there from businesses in rethinking some of the approaches that have shaped the last 2 decades and probably recalibrating in light of the pandemic. So overall, these 5 elements, we believe the focus on them can bring an overall impetus around sustainability and overall the well-being of society. Many more out there, but the 5, these are the ones that I wanted to underline.
Okay, thank you so much, Filippo. And maybe could you pose a question back to Bindu from Arrow, please?
Yes, of course, Bindu, fantastic work you do at the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, Arrow in short. My question was to you as a civil society organization, as a leader within one of these organizations. Do you think that we are making enough progress on the SDGs? Do you think that at a country level we are making enough progress? And has this pandemic changed the way that you are being approached by governments around their mechanisms for engaging civil society? Has there been any changes and the progress side? So the double question to you.
Thanks so much, Filippo. As discussed in the previous dialogues, the compounding effects of COVID-19 on health, equity, and economy is deepening pre-existing inequalities amongst countries and exposing vulnerabilities, which are in turn amplifying the impacts of the pandemic. But one question which resonates deeply with all the countries and actors in these trying times is how resilient are our socioeconomic structures, policy frameworks for whole prosperity, and the mechanisms to govern them. More importantly, how prepared are we to thrive despite the crisis of our times? The UN report released in April recognized that the first 4 years of implementation of the 2030 agenda had included important progress in some areas, such as global poverty continued to decline steadily, reduction in maternal and child mortality rates, increased access to clean energy sources, bloom in mobile telephony, reduced carbon intensity per value added, and a few more. While significant number of countries were reflecting a promising progress in attaining SDGs, but overall, the world was not on track to deliver its commitments by 2030. And with COVID-19, it can be speculated that the progress can be stalled or even reversed, unfortunately, in the following years. World Bank estimates COVID-19 could push around 40 to 60 million people into extreme poverty, and another estimate from UNESCO points out that as of now, over 1 billion students are devoid of access to education. Likewise, a significant decline in global merchandise trade in the second quarter of 2020. However, on a positive note, the carbon dioxide emissions in the first quarter of 2020 were 5% lower than in 2020. Albeit this progress seems to be short-lived as countries are in a hurry to speed up their economy in business as usual nature. It is certain that the targeted SDGs goal would be challenging to achieve by 2030, but in the wake of crisis, countries are increasingly realizing the roles of civil society. They can serve as an advocate, a watchdog, and above all, as a critical partner. I see that social media has played a pivotal role in enhancing the transparency and accountability of the government actions, and civil societies have mobilized online spaces innovatively to organize campaigns and provide feedback directly into the government interventions. And government seems to be quite receptive of the involvement of civil society through these channels. What's essential to acknowledge here is that there is no one-size-fits-all mechanism or policy, but there are some underlying fundamental principles which will be critical for us to achieve SDGs without leaving anyone behind in the process. There are many topics that need attention, but for the time's sake, I would like to reiterate 2 points. First one is coherent policies, both horizontally and vertically across agencies to meet the economic sufficiency and social inclusion while maintaining a harmonious relationship with nature. And the second one is revitalization of decentralized and connected local societies, which needs participation at all levels. But in my experience, inclusion of civil society lies at the heart of it. Moving forward, envisioning infinite growth in a planet with finite resources won't be possible. In this context, maintaining a system of check and balances in governance cannot be undermined, especially while the government's planned service delivery builds trust in public institutions. develops clear socioeconomic recovery policies, and reveals social connectivity. Overall, the recovery pathways should encourage the government to involve civil societies meaningfully more than ever in their governance mechanisms. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Best wishes. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No worries, no worries. So thank you so much, Bindu and Felipe. We've come to the end of the session, and we've had good dialogue on the key issues involving governance and policy coherence for sustainable development, ranging from capacities to tools, strategies, to transparency and accountability, to lessons learned and governance beyond government. Because we're already over time, I'd like to turn the closing remarks over to our colleague from OECD, Tatiana Teplova, to provide a few closing remarks. I would also like to encourage the participants and presenters to answer some of the questions in the question box if you can. We'll keep the Zoom open for a few minutes afterwards, so you can type in those answers. So Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Eric, and your excellencies, dear panelists, dear participants, dear co-hosts. I have genuinely enjoyed the rich and interregional discussion today. And indeed, we have heard that these are important issues and they do require our urgent attention. We've heard about some of the experiences, lessons learned, and good practices on governance and policy coherence that have emerged in several countries to ensure a sustainable recovery in line with the SDG agenda, while also aiming to safeguard jobs and to respond to immediate health and social needs. And this experience is proof that a shift towards more coherent decision-making is already in motion in many countries. And this is critical to ensuring that SDG progress made so far is not undermined. And indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the forefront the need for coherent and multidimensional policies that align short-term recovery measures with long-term sustainability commitment. And now we need to convey this message beyond the circle of the converted, those that are present here with us today. We need to convince the governments around the world that governance and policy coherence for the SDGs are worth the investment, and that SDGs are more relevant than ever. Tools by our partners, IGES, but then also so many other partners who are participating in this discussion today could support governments with what they need to build back better. And we much look forward to continue this dialogue and to working with all of you. So once again, a big thank you to our co-hosts, to all of the speakers, and to all of the participants for joining us in this event. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Anna, and thanks so much to our colleagues at OECD, and especially to our hosts from the governments of Romania and Mongolia. Here at IGES, I also want to extend appreciation to my Tomoko Yamashita. She was integral in helping prepare the session, as well as Bob McDonald, Fujino, Joe Shin, and all of my colleagues in our Sustainability Governance Center. We really appreciate all of the support. We thank you very much, and tape version of the session will be posted online, and we also hope to develop a discussion paper based upon the comments today that we will share. Thank you so much, everybody, and as I mentioned, for our panelists, if you have time to stay online to respond to questions, you can answer live by typing in the answers. Have a very good evening here from Japan. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.